Have you ever felt the pressure to perform, as if your life had to be a constant stage show just to matter? A world of flashing lights tells you to stay loud, stay wild, stay unpredictable, or risk being forgotten. We scroll, we post, we perform. But underneath it all, there's a quiet hunger no filter can satisfy. Because when the noise fades and the screen goes dark, what's left? Most people can't bear that silence. They run from it, fearing what might rise to the surface if they stop chasing stimulation for even a moment. I've come to see something different. The lives that endure, the ones that carry real weight, rarely look spectacular in the moment. They are shaped in stillness, in routine, in the kind of discipline the world dismisses as boring. It is in repetition that strength hardens, in solitude that clarity sharpens. What looks ordinary from the outside can become extraordinary within. So here's the question worth holding on to. What if the very thing you've been avoiding, the predictable, the steady, the unseen, is the path to your greatest power? Stay with me. Let's explore that together. As we step into the first chapter, imagine this scene, a room with no distractions, no phone buzzing, no screen glowing, no voices cutting through the air, just you and the hum of silence. For many, this is unbearable. Restlessness builds, thoughts scatter, and within moments the hand reaches for something, anything, to fill the emptiness. But this is the ground where power is planted, not in noise, but in stillness, not in the spectacle that gathers applause, but in the quiet rituals no one sees. The unshared, the unposted, the unseen acts done in solitude, these are the stones that build empires of the mind. We are taught to believe strength is forged in explosions, in extraordinary events, in the wild pursuit of novelty. But watch closely. The lives that endure, the ones we admire centuries later, are not shaped in chaos. They are shaped in repetition. They are built in the spaces most people scroll past without a second glance. Power does not come from being loud, it comes from being steady. Now, imagine a man who holds the known world in his hand. Armies move at his command. Palaces stretch before him. His name alone inspires awe. Yet what does he do with his mornings? He sits with a journal. He writes not for applause, not for history, but for clarity. Marcus Aurelius, emperor of Rome, Stoic philosopher, ruler of millions, chose to return again and again to the same reflections, the same questions, the same reminders to himself. He did not chase adrenaline, he chased alignment. Think about that. The most powerful man alive did not find his strength in chaos, but in discipline. That is not boring, that is sovereignty. Here's where the paradox reveals itself. We've been conditioned to see excitement as the measure of success. If you're not flashing, not moving, not shouting, you risk becoming invisible. The world whispers, be interesting or be irrelevant. But the wisdom of the ancients shows something else. Philosophers, creators, rulers, they embraced the mundane. They made peace with stillness. They chose predictability as the soil where greatness would grow. And when the noise faded, they faced the hardest opponent of all, themselves. Moving into the heart of this truth, ask yourself a question. What rises in you when silence stretches? What surfaces when you sit in a room without distraction? Most people don't want to know. That's why they run from boredom, from stillness, from solitude. Because in those moments, the buried parts of the self rise up. The fears you've hidden, the desires you've disguised, the dreams you've abandoned, it all comes forward. And most can't bear the confrontation, so they flee back into noise. Seneca once wrote, It is not that we have a short time to live, but that we waste much of it. The waste happens not in silence, but in running from it. From here, let's see the power of small strokes. Like a chisel striking stone, steady and patient, until the form hidden inside finally emerges, it does not try to impress. Slowly, silently, it moves, and over time, it reshapes mountains. That is what true discipline looks like. Slow, steady, invisible to the eye that only looks for sparks, but unshakable. This is the path of those who no longer need the world to approve. They are not chasing novelty. They are not addicted to highs. They build day after day without spectacle until their very life becomes a mountain no storm can move. Advancing deeper, you see why such people become magnetic. While others burn bright and collapse, they remain. They do not swing between chaos and exhaustion. They do not break under criticism or shift with every trend. They become anchors, pillars, not sparks, but steady flames. People may overlook them at first, may even call them dull. But when storms hit, when chaos comes, it is to these steady ones that others run. Because reliability in the end commands more respect than spectacle ever will. At this stage, the lesson grows sharper. If you can endure the silence that most people flee from, you have already crossed a threshold few dare to touch. If you can endure the silence most people flee, you unlock a fire few ever touch, one that doesn't blaze and fade, but burns steady, deep, eternal. Not the fire of excitement, but the fire of endurance. It doesn't flare up and fade. It burns deep. It steadies. And endurance is the quality that separates the ones who glow briefly from the ones who illuminate across time. Now imagine yourself stripped of performance. No audience, no applause, no one to impress. Just the raw truth of who you are when no one is watching. That is what boredom does. It pulls the mask away. Epictetus reminded us, first say to yourself what you would be, and then do what you have to do. In silence, you see clearly what you are. You can no longer hide behind noise. And from that confrontation comes transformation, because only when you see yourself without illusion can you choose who you will become. Here's where the twist emerges. The people who embrace this, who stop running from boredom, become dangerous in the most beautiful way. Why? Because they are free. They are no longer manipulated by novelty. They no longer need approval. They are steady, like a glacier cutting through mountains, like a flame that cannot be blown out. They are no longer chasing. They are building. And in that building lies their true power. Most live as sparks, flashing, impressive for a moment, forgotten the next. But those who embrace stillness, who honor repetition, who live a life boring on the outside, become foundations on which others build. When chaos comes, people turn to them. When storms rise, their calm becomes shelter. That is not boring. That is rare. As the chapter closes, let the image settle. A glacier moving slowly through stone. A man writing quietly in his journal while empires bow to his name. A life unseen, unposted, but unshakable. This is where true sovereignty lives. Not in spectacle, but in stillness. Not in novelty, but in repetition. Not in chaos, but in discipline. So when the world demands that you entertain, that you perform, that you never stop moving, remember this. The quiet path you avoid may be the very path that sets you free. And when you learn to stay, to endure, to build without applause, you begin to touch the kind of power no one can take from you. The cut is simple and final. To endure boredom is to claim sovereignty, quiet, unshaken, untouchable, and sovereignty is untouchable. Moving into the second chapter, picture this. A craftsman bent over his workbench day after day, shaping the same piece of wood. To an outsider, it looks monotonous, almost pointless. But over time, that steady hand transforms rough timber into something timeless. That is the quiet power of repetition. Not thrilling, not glamorous, but unshakable. The people who endure understand this. They grasp what others overlook, compound results. They know the value of doing the same thing over and over, not because it feels good in the moment, but because it works. Now ask yourself honestly, when was the last time you did something every single day for a year? Not because it was entertaining, not because it gave you a rush, but because it made you better. That question cuts deeper than it seems. It reveals how chained we are to novelty. We crave growth, but resist the grind that produces it. We speak of mastery, but recoil from the boredom mastery demands. Yet the paradox is clear. All mastery is born in boredom. The athlete who trains before dawn, the writer who fills page after page, the monk who repeats his chant in silence, the entrepreneur who shows up regardless of mood, none of them flee from boredom. They wield it. Here's where Stoic wisdom illuminates the path. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself each morning of the tasks ahead, knowing most were the same as the day before. He didn't see this as drudgery, but as alignment. Epictetus said, "First say to yourself what you would be, and then do what you have to do." Discipline is not variety. Discipline is repetition transformed into strength. The Stoics understood what we forget. The ordinary, faithfully repeated, becomes extraordinary. From here, consider the threshold most never cross. Boredom is not an obstacle. It is a portal. It is the narrow gate through which depth is reached. On the other side of boredom lies clarity, focus, spiritual intensity. When you stop demanding that every moment entertain you, you begin to reclaim your time, your mind, your energy. You stop living like an addict, chasing a high, and start living like a builder shaping stone into a cathedral. That shift from chasing excitement to cultivating depth is one of the most powerful transformations a human can make. It doesn't look flashy, it won't go viral, but it changes everything. Now imagine the kind of person who can no longer be manipulated by novelty. They are calm, grounded, predictable in the best sense. You cannot bait them with approval because they don't need it. You cannot twist them with reaction because they do not seek it. They have built an internal rhythm so steady that the chaos of the world fails to shake them. In a society addicted to extremes, this kind of structure becomes magnetic. People begin to trust you, not because you are exciting, but because you are reliable. Here's a story. I once knew a man who was mocked for his routines. He ate the same breakfast, trained at the same hour, wrote the same number of pages daily. Friends laughed at his predictability, but years later, while their lives had scattered into fragments, he had built a body of work, a foundation of health, and a mind at peace. The same pattern that looked boring revealed itself as unbreakable strength. This is the hidden edge of those who embrace stillness. At this stage, the contrast is sharp. Most people burn out every 6 months because they chase extremes. They ignite like fireworks, dazzling but short-lived. Those who stay steady, however, become pillars. They keep their word. They show up. They do not collapse when the high fades because they never depended on the high to begin with. They are not sparks. They are stone foundations. You can lean on them. You can build on them. Now imagine if being boring was not a weakness but a rebellion. In a culture engineered to keep you restless, what if the radical act was to remain consistent? What if the real superpower was not spontaneity, but discipline? What if the highest flex in a society drowning in distraction was to be unmoved, unshaken, committed? Seneca once wrote, "To be everywhere is to be nowhere." The boring person chooses to be somewhere, fully, steadily, repeatedly. That choice defies the world's demand for spectacle. Here's where the chapter closes. Boring is not boring. It is rare. It is sacred. It is the seedbed of something eternal. Those who understand this do not waste themselves chasing sparks in the dark. They build slow burning fires that never die. So let me leave you with this question. In a world addicted to stimulation, could the ultimate rebellion be to live with consistency? If so, then boring is not your flaw, it is your crown. And from here, we step into the next paradox. How boring habits do more than steady your days, they make you mentally invincible. Advancing to the third chapter, here's the paradox that unsettles most hearts. From the outside, discipline looks lifeless, robotic, dull. It seems like chains, a prison of rules. But from the inside, for the one who dares to live it, discipline becomes the most liberating force imaginable. Freedom is not in doing whatever you want, whenever you want. That path leads to chaos, scattered energy, half-built dreams. The people who chase that kind of freedom end up the most lost. But those who embrace structure, who return to the same rituals, who repeat the same work each day, they become invincible. Now imagine a soldier standing guard through the cold night, long after the camp has fallen asleep. His watch is not glamorous. No one applauds him. Yet the safety of the entire army rests on his quiet repetition. This is discipline, unseen, steady, essential. And here's the hard truth. Most people do not fail because life is unfair. They fail because they cannot stay focused. They cannot delay gratification. They cannot resist distraction. Not weak, but undisciplined. And discipline does not arrive with a flash of inspiration. It is not born in a moment of motivation. It grows in boring repetition. It thrives in the work no one praises, the tasks done when no one is watching. It demands you show up even when it's inconvenient, even when it's unsexy, even when every fiber of you screams to quit. This is where transformation hides. Not in the highlight reel, in the shadows. Think of it. The strongest people in every field, philosophy, athletics, business, art, share one trait: extreme consistency. They repeat, they refine, they endure, and the world calls them talented. But talent is only the tip of the iceberg. What lies beneath? Early mornings, meditation, writing the same sentence 10 times until it sings. Failure, revision, patience, the slow death of ego, the quiet birth of mastery. What looks dull to others is in fact the hammer shaping an unbreakable soul. From here, let's ask the question that cuts deep. How different would your life be if you could trust yourself to do the hard thing every single day, whether you felt like it or not? Imagine the strength of that trust. What would change if you kept your promises to yourself, even when no one else knew? That is the power of discipline. It is not about ticking boxes. It is about becoming someone you can respect, someone you can rely on. Seneca once wrote, "No man is free who is not master of himself." Discipline is not punishment. It is the gift of being your own master. At this stage, you begin to see the deeper layer. When you become disciplined, you become mentally dangerous, not in cruelty, but in endurance, because now you can delay gratification longer than most people can stay interested. You can endure discomfort. You can outlast trends, criticism, betrayal. While others react, you direct. Your mind ceases to be a battlefield of conflicting impulses. It becomes a cathedral of focus. In today's world, that kind of mind is a rare weapon. Imagine carrying such clarity when everyone else is drowning in distraction. That is real power. Here's where the rebellion comes alive. Every app, every headline, every ad is designed to hijack your focus. You are being trained to crave stimulation, to fear silence, to escape boredom. But discipline stands against this. It is the shield. It is the quiet rebellion. Every time you choose something difficult and boring on purpose, working out, journaling, practicing scales, sitting in silence, you are rewiring your mind to resist distraction. You are building muscle others cannot see. Over time, that muscle compounds. What used to feel impossible becomes natural. What once felt boring becomes sacred. Think of a monk seated in silence, repeating the same prayer each morning. To the untrained eye, it looks pointless. To him, it is transcendence, or the musician practicing scales for hours, not for applause, but for mastery. These people live what the Stoics taught, that discipline is not a cage, but the very doorway to freedom. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself each dawn. At dawn, when you have trouble getting out of bed, tell yourself, I have to go to work as a human being. That is the voice of discipline, not glamorous, but sovereign. From here, another truth reveals itself. Discipline simplifies life. Once you decide what matters and order your days around it, energy returns to you. You stop wasting hours on nonsense. You stop negotiating with yourself. You simply do, and that creates space. Space for clarity, space for creativity, space for peace. No longer tossed on the emotional roller coaster of inconsistent action, you grow steady. Others feel it. They sense the calm, and calmness in a frantic world becomes an edge sharper than any sword. Now ask yourself this deeper philosophical question. If your soul is a fire, what kind of fuel are you giving it? Are you burning bright for a moment, then collapsing into ash? Or are you feeding it slow, steady energy that carries you through decades? Discipline feeds the slow fire. It turns your soul into a furnace that does not flicker in the wind. That is why it makes you invincible, not because doubt never comes, but because you act despite the doubt. That is what boring habits create, a mind that cannot be broken. And this is where the path grows quiet again, the quiet path to greatness, the road where boring people become legends. They are not chasing the crowd. They are not clinging to excitement. They are building the kind of life that endures when the noise fades. So let me leave you with this cut of truth. Discipline is not lifeless. Discipline is life harnessed. It is the spine of sovereignty, and if you embrace it, you too can become unshakable. Subscribe if this truth speaks to you. Comment steady if you feel the weight of it. Because steadiness, in the end, is what makes a person unforgettable. And from here, we step into the next revelation, how the quiet path, lived fully, transforms not just your mind, but your very legacy. Advancing to the fourth chapter, let us face the illusions that our culture feeds us. We are told that greatness must roar, that it must arrive like a storm tearing through the sky, like fireworks bursting over a crowd, like a name shouted so loudly it echoes across continents. We imagine legends as men and women who shook the earth with charisma, who left dazzling sparks trailing behind them. But if you stop and look carefully, really look, you will find a quieter truth. Greatness is rarely loud. It does not come dressed in applause. It grows in silence, in repetition, in the rituals no one notices until years later. Now imagine the philosopher in his small study, writing line after line for decades, with no thought of being remembered. His words are private, but they survive centuries. Or the scientist running the same experiment again and again, seeking truth while the world laughs at his obsession. Think of the monk who chants the same prayer every morning, his voice echoing into a hall where no audience sits. Or the athlete who trains in the cold before sunrise, unseen, unknown, repeating the same movements until his body and mind become unbreakable. None of this looks spectacular in the moment. No one is watching. No one claps. No one posts it online. And yet, these are the lives that alter history. These are the people who shape the future, while the rest of us are distracted by noise. Here's where Stoic wisdom cuts deep. Marcus Aurelius wrote his meditations not to be admired, but to align his soul. He was emperor of Rome, and yet he understood that power without self-mastery is nothing. Seneca warned that the hunger for applause leaves a man poor because the approval of the crowd is fickle and fragile. Epictetus taught that freedom is not found in doing whatever you want, but in disciplining yourself to endure what is necessary. The ancients knew that greatness was not about spectacle, but about substance. The world calls such lives boring. Later, it calls them immortal. From here, the deeper truth emerges. Most people are terrified of themselves. They fill their calendars with appointments, their feeds with endless noise, their ears with constant distraction. Why? Because silence exposes them. Stillness reveals what they've been hiding. Boredom forces them to look directly at the emptiness they've been running from. So they run faster. They stay busy. They chase novelty. They never stop moving. But the one who endures boredom, who accepts silence, who walks the same path every day without demanding new excitement, that one is not escaping himself, he is becoming himself. At this stage, let me ask you something sharp. Would you be willing to live invisibly for 10 years if it meant being unforgettable for the rest of time? That is the bargain boring people understand. They know that greatness is not born in applause, but in obscurity. It is not forged in being seen, but in seeing clearly. They learn to direct their energy toward a single aim, to stay steady long after passion fades, to keep going when excitement has died. Most people quit when the repetition becomes heavy, but the legend begins there. Here's where the irony of history becomes clear. The same people mocked as dull, predictable, unremarkable often become the ones whose names endure. Their works fill libraries. Their words are quoted centuries later. Their names are carved on buildings. Why? Because while others tried to be impressive, they tried to be useful. While others chased admiration, they sought accuracy. And accuracy, practiced for decades, builds something charisma never can. It builds truth. Now picture yourself walking in circles. Every day you trace the same path. To the impatient eye, it looks meaningless. But with each lap, your steps grow heavier with strength. Each lap sharpens your focus. Each lap deepens your spirit. This is the real cost of greatness, to keep walking when no one applauds, to trust the process when no results appear, to believe in your vision when everyone else calls it irrelevant. The Stoics understood this. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself every morning that his duty was not to impress, but to live in accordance with reason. Seneca wrote that the tragedy of life is not that it is short, but that so much of it is wasted. Epictetus urged us to master ourselves, to endure what is hard, to treat discipline as freedom. From here, we must be honest. This path is lonely. It is not glamorous. You may walk it for years without recognition. You may be misunderstood, dismissed, mocked as dull. But when others collapse from chasing noise, you will remain. When others burn out, you will still burn steady. That is why so few choose this way. It demands self-trust. It requires patience that feels endless. It asks you to carry faith when no one else does. Each return to the same path does not repeat, it deepens. What looks circular is in fact a spiral, carrying you inward and upward at once. Here's the paradox. The more you embrace boredom, the more you transcend it. What once felt hollow begins to pulse with life. The repetition you feared becomes rhythm. The monotony you resisted becomes music. The ritual turns into an altar. The repetition becomes art. Eventually, you see that boredom was never a weakness. It was discipline in disguise, devotion hidden behind monotony. A spiritual practice most are too restless to endure. At this stage, let the question burn in you. Are you living to impress the present or to shape the future? Are your choices designed for applause or for impact? Because legacy does not bend to attention spans. Legacy does not care about trending topics. Legacy is built on substance, and substance is always slow, always quiet, always steady. So here is the final cut. To look ordinary outside is to become extraordinary within. To walk unseen is to leave echoes that outlive applause. And when the noise of the world fades, and it always does, it will not be the fireworks that endure. It will be the steady light, the quiet ones, the ones who mastered themselves, the ones who dared to be boring long enough to become eternal. Entering the final chapter, something shifts. If you walk the path of discipline long enough, the world itself begins to feel different. The routines that once felt dull start to settle into you like breath, like rhythm. What seemed like emptiness becomes fullness. What felt meaningless begins to hold depth. This is the quiet turning point few ever reach. Now imagine the silence after the storm. No music, no voices, no scrolling, no chatter, only the echo of your own presence. Most people run from that. The second it arrives, they scramble for distraction, phones, playlists, endless motion, anything to escape what rises in stillness. But here's the revelation. Boredom is not your enemy. It is not a void. It is a veil. Not the absence of meaning, but the threshold to it. Here's where the test unfolds. Most never stay long enough to discover what lies beyond boredom. They assume there's nothing there. But those who endure, those who sit with the silence until the itch to escape dies down, they discover something else entirely. They discover being, pure, undiluted presence. Boredom strips away performance. It tears down the masks. It leaves you facing the raw landscape of your inner world, your fears, your long-buried dreams, your unspoken regrets. Most people aren't ready for that confrontation, so they run. But if you stay, if you refuse to escape, boredom transforms. From here, presence is born, and presence becomes awareness. And awareness, when carried long enough, turns into awe. Ask yourself this: when was the last time you sat in silence and felt truly alive? Not because something thrilling was happening, but because you were finally paying attention. That is what boredom, at its deepest level, offers. It sharpens attention. And attention, pure and steady, is the foundation of transcendence. The philosopher Simone Weil once said, "Attention is the rarest and purest form of generosity." She was right. In a world hijacked by noise, where every app claws at your focus, offering your full attention, is a rebellion. It is also an awakening. When you give yourself wholly to one thing, fully, patiently, repeatedly, that thing reveals itself in ways you never imagined. A walk becomes meditation, a breath becomes prayer, a single sentence becomes a symphony. At this stage, you begin to see boredom for what it really is. Not emptiness, but detox. The discomfort of a mind withdrawing from overstimulation. The silence after the carnival of noise. At first, it feels unbearable, but beyond that discomfort lies a strength most never touch. The strength to sit still and see, to act without needing a reaction, to create not from hunger for approval, but from alignment with truth. Now imagine the power of such a mind. While the world scrambles for stimulation, you are unmoved. While others act only to be seen, you act from purpose. The ability to endure boredom becomes the ability to endure life itself. And in that endurance, something sacred awakens. Here's where the cut strikes deep. Boredom, embraced, becomes a doorway to timelessness. When you no longer rush from one moment to the next, you finally arrive in the present. And in presence, time dissolves. You stop calculating, comparing, chasing. You start being. And in that being, you touch something eternal. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself daily that life is only ever lived in the present moment. Seneca warned that busyness is a kind of slavery. Epictetus taught that freedom is found not in running, but in staying. All of them pointed to this same truth. Greatness is not about doing more, but about being more. More focused, more grounded, more alive. So here's the paradox resolved. In a world obsessed with excitement, the radical act is to slow down. In a culture that worships spectacle, the true rebellion is to repeat, to commit, to focus. What looks boring on the surface is, in truth, sacred. The rituals you once dismissed become altars. The repetitions you once hated become art. And when the noise of the world finally fades, it will not be the fireworks we remember. It will be the steady lights, the ones who stood firm, the ones who mastered themselves, the ones who dared to be boring enough to become eternal. Here is the quiet truth. Boredom is not your enemy. It is the doorway to presence. When you stop rushing and let silence settle, what once felt empty begins to feel full. Repetition becomes rhythm. Stillness becomes strength. Time itself seems to dissolve, and you step into the rare gift of simply being. Greatness has never been built on constant noise. It grows in the steady lives that endure. To be grounded, to be focused, to be alive in the present, that is real power. What looks boring from the outside often becomes extraordinary within. The ones dismissed today as dull may be the ones remembered tomorrow, not for sparks that fade, but for foundations that last. So ask yourself, what kind of life could you create if you stopped running from boredom and chose to embrace it? If this message resonates, subscribe and continue this journey. Comment steady to remind yourself of this truth. And as you carry it forward, remember, the world does not need more spectacle. It needs people willing to be still, steady, and strong enough to last.